I'll just go over some of the uses of the StreetLight metrics that we use here at the HRTPO. There's three areas I pretty much want to go over today. One is our use of the OD data that you can get provided by StreetLight. Also some of the uses that we have for the AADT volume estimates. And then as I was putting this presentation together, I noticed that we have many different metrics in different departments that we use here for bicycling and walking estimates. So I'll go over a lot of those here at the end of my presentation. So looking at the origin destination data analyses that we've done, this is by no means a comprehensive list. There's a few other things we did, but today I thought I would just highlight four of the efforts that we've done here at HRTPO. We looked at highway gateways that are used by port trucks here in Hampton Roads. We did an analysis of two of the river crossings in our region between the cities of Norfolk and Portsmouth. We did a study on Hampton Boulevard for the city of Norfolk, and as part of that, we looked at what would be the impacts of changing speed limits on removing trucks from the corridor. And the last thing I want to go over is a study that's currently ongoing here, where we're looking in more detail at the gateways to our region. So the first study I wanted to talk about is one we did, it's probably been 4 or 5 years ago now, I would say, where we wanted to look at the highway gateways used by Hampton Roads port trucks. I'll go much more into gateways here, as I mentioned in the last of our OD studies. So I won't go into too much detail specifically as to why the gateways are important and why we wanted to look at it for trucks. But just to say, this was one of our first efforts to use StreetLight to see where are travelers, in this case trucks, where are they coming from, where are they going, what routes are they using. So for this study in particular, we not only looked at the ports, but also many of the distribution centers in our region. So this was a list provided by the Port of Virginia of some of the largest distribution centers in our region that use the port for transporting freight throughout the world. And so this was a list that we started with and tried to determine what gateways are trucks using to access these locations. So in StreetLight, we used a OD to present geography and OD analysis to come up with this map here that you see here, which is largely, these are the destinations and origins of trucks that are coming to and from Hampton Roads to these distribution centers and to the port to transport their freight. The second analysis I wanted to talk about, I'll just give a little background on this. There's two tunnels that connect two of the more urban areas of our region, which are the city of Norfolk and the city of Portsmouth, and they travel under the southern branch of the Elizabeth River. So going back, I think it was about 2014, these facilities, which were generally free or previously free, had tolls added to them in order to pay for a widening of the Midtown Tunnel and also for maintenance to the downtown tunnel. So this was a very politically sensitive decision, to say the least, in our region, and still is here 8 years later, I guess I would say. So as part of this, we were asked to do an analysis of how many travelers are going out of their way to avoid paying the tolls at the Midtown and downtown tunnel, specifically for people living in the city of Portsmouth and the city of Norfolk who honestly have to travel pretty far out of their way, generally, if they're going from one city to the other, to avoid paying a toll. The Gilmerton Bridge and the High Rise Bridge would be the closest detours, and they're, I would say, at least 5 miles to the south of the city line of Norfolk, probably. So it's not a short distance they're going to avoid these tolls. So we use StreetLight data for this analysis and did an OD analysis with a metal filter for the toll facilities. And ultimately, based on the analysis on the StreetLight data, it looks like about 10% of the trips made by these drivers from Norfolk and Portsmouth are going out of their way to avoid paying these tolls. So it was interesting to be able to report that data to various committees that we had assigned to this tolling issue. The third analysis I want to mention was a study that we were asked to do by the city of Norfolk for Hampton Boulevard. For those of you that are not from here, Hampton Boulevard has got to be one of the most unique corridors that is out there in the world, to say the least. Just to give you a little background on it, if you start at the south end, it connects to the Midtown Tunnel, which I just talked about. So it crosses from a tunnel into a dense residential area with a narrow 4-lane roadway, travels north through Old Dominion University, right through the center of campus, goes north through another residential area, goes to the Norfolk International Terminals, which is the second largest marine terminal facility, and then ends at Naval Station Norfolk, the largest naval base in the world. So Hampton Boulevard is notorious for issues and studies looking at through the years just to see how can we improve roadway travel on Hampton Boulevard. So City of Norfolk asked us to look at Hampton Boulevard and give them any ideas that we could to improve safety, reduce volumes, reduce speeds, things like that. So as part of this analysis, we looked at all the trucks that use Hampton Boulevard. I failed to mention that to connect from the two largest marine terminals for the Port of Virginia, you primarily have to use Hampton Boulevard to get from Norfolk International Terminals to the Virginia International Gateway. So when you're talking this narrow roadway through a dense residential neighborhood and you have thousands of trucks using it each day to get from the two port facilities, needless to say, it makes for a very, once again, politically sensitive situation. So in fact, trucks are even banned from Hampton Boulevard during not even just the overnight hours, but from PM rush through the AM rush. So it's definitely an issue. So we wanted to look at, as part of this, what impact, if we lowered speed limits on Hampton Boulevard, could we expect to have on the number of trucks that use Hampton Boulevard? So we decided to use StreetLight data to see origin, destination, and where trucks that are using Hampton Boulevard and accessing the two port facilities, what routes are they using, and then use a model based on that to determine, if we lowered the speed limit, what could we expect to see in terms of a drop in the number of trucks. So ultimately, the analysis on the right is what we ended up with in the study, and it ended up being about a 3% drop, I think we could expect in the number of trucks using that corridor, just based on lowering the speed limit. So it was just good to be able to use StreetLight and see, where trucks, are going from and what routes are they using to travel between the port facilities, and how many are actually using Hampton Boulevard. The last of the OD analysis I wanted to describe today has to do with a study that's ongoing, which is the Hampton Roads Gateway study. Many people in our region like to refer to Hampton Roads as a cul-de-sac. I-64 is the only interstate access to and from the region, and it ends in our region. So it's obviously very important to make sure that we have access to and from our region for all of our important aspects of our economy, whether it's freight movement, whether it's tourism, whether it's the military, which is the largest employer in our region. So there's been a lot of talk recently about different improvements to these gateways, whether it's widening I-64 between here and Richmond, whether it's the proposed I-87, which would convert the US 17 southern approach between here and Raleigh, North Carolina, or possibly even improving Route 58 to the west to a limited access facility. So we've been asked to do a study looking at all these and see what would be the benefits of some of these improvements to the gateways to our region. So as part of that, we have used StreetLight data to determine where trips are coming from to and from our region. And so this is a map that we use via StreetLight data to determine, hey, where are people coming from, coming to and from our region, and what gateways are they currently using? And using this data, we actually prepared a model to help determine what changes in trips we could expect if improvements were made at the various gateways, the widening of I-64 and I-87 that I mentioned before. So based on the StreetLight data and a model that we put together, it looks like one of the routes that would be most likely to provide additional trips, in this case between Virginia and North Carolina, would be improving what we call Route 58 to the I-58 option, which is making it a limited access facility entirely between our region and I-95. So it's definitely good to have StreetLight data to be able to know where people are coming from that are accessing our region. Next, I wanted to talk about some of the data we use in terms of the daily traffic volume estimates. So this is a lot of work that I do in terms of the congestion management process. So we've got a pretty comprehensive network in our region that's over 1,800 roadway segments. So it includes anything that's a minor arterial or above, and quite a number of selected collectors in our region. So for each of these roadway segments, we try to get an existing and historical volume that we can use as part of our analysis. Well, traffic volumes are not always available when you're looking at 1,800 segments. Sometimes the data may not be up to date. Particularly in our region, I've noticed where if we have new roadways that are constructed, it does take a little bit of time for VDOT to add it into their traffic count program. So it may take 2 or 3 3-year count cycles. So in the meantime, we definitely want to have an estimate of what the traffic volumes might be on some of these newer roadways. So we do use StreetLight AADT estimates to fill in the gaps in the region. And we also, I wanted to mention as part of this, have a project prioritization process as part of our long-range transportation plan. So we get, for our last round, it was between 200 and 300 candidate projects that we needed to score. And part of that was obviously volume data, even if it was an existing roadway or if it was a new roadway, what might some of the parallel facilities have? And so particularly in the rural areas and also on some of the ramps in our region, we had no traffic volume data available. So for all those gaps, we also used StreetLight's AADT data to fill in the gaps. So we had traffic volumes for every single one of those candidate projects. The last thing I wanted to mention today is some of the bicycling and walking metrics that we use from StreetLight data, some of the uses we have for them. This was one of the first efforts we did, once again, a few years ago. The Virginia Capitol Trail is a popular multi-use trail. It connects downtown Richmond with the Jamestown area near Williamsburg. It's about a 53-mile trail. And what we wanted to know was what kind of dollars are we bringing into the region with this tourist attraction, and how we could apply this to other areas in our region if we built other multi-use paths, whether it's a Birthplace of America trail or Hampton Roads Trail. Some of these trails and what could be, some of the benefits you could expect in terms of tourism dollars coming to your region. As part of this, we use StreetLight data to determine how many out-of-region visitors were attracted to Hampton Roads solely by the Virginia Capitol Trail. And so based on this, the home location of the Capitol Trail users, only about half of the users lived in our region. So it's interesting to see that. A lot of them lived in Virginia, but not necessarily in our region. So that is bringing dollars to our region. Just looking at the pie chart here, 1% of the users were from the Baltimore area, 1% from Philadelphia. So clearly that's bringing tourist dollars to our region, and it's definitely a benefit of these multi-use paths. And this is information we can use for some of our other active transportation studies moving forward. Another thing we do here at the TPO is we've done a lot of analysis in terms of the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on our transportation system, and not just roadway travel, but what have the impacts been to, let's say, our airports, our public transportation system, things like that. So we wanted to see what the impacts of bicycling and walking were in our region over the pandemic. So I'm sure many of you know, getting counts for the number of pedestrians and bicyclists is a very, very difficult task. Even in those locations where you do have counts, it only represents maybe one trail or things like that. So we ended up using the StreetLight bicycle and index and the StreetLight pedestrian index to try to determine some of the changes that we're seeing in our region due to the pandemic. So this is analysis we had in our most recent state of transportation that came out at the end of last year. So you can see, based on StreetLight's data, no surprise, we did see a big increase in the number of bicycle trips starting at when the pandemic started in March of 2020, throughout the summer of 2020, and then even into 2021. Generally not quite the same levels that we saw in 2020, but definitely an increase over the pre-pandemic conditions of 2019. We also looked at the pedestrian data. That seemed to be a lot more noisy than what we saw with the bicycle trips, but you still can see, for example, in March, April, May of 2020, the big increase in pedestrian traffic that we saw in our region as the pandemic was underway. Another thing we've used StreetLight for is to determine where the highest amount of bicycle and pedestrian activity occurs in our region. And so this helps us with our active transportation planning efforts here at the TPO. We can look at, these are some of the areas we should probably emphasize, because this is where most of the pedestrian and bicycle traffic is occurring. So on the left is the bicycle index, and on the right is the pedestrian index. So not really a surprise, the Virginia Beach oceanfront area, definitely some of the highest areas of bicycle and pedestrian activity. Also downtown Norfolk and the Old Dominion University area, definitely see a lot of activity there. So not really a surprise, but it's good to be able to quantify it. So once again, as we move forward with our active transportation planning, we can use this information to emphasize improvements in those areas. Last thing I wanted to mention is a recent task that we were asked to do, and that was to help James City County with a raised grant submittal that they were providing for Route 60 Pocahontas Trail. This area, Busch Gardens, is to the top left of the aerial you see there. And then to the bottom right, you get into more industrial uses. There's a Walmart distribution center just to the bottom right of the picture. So it's a pretty busy corridor. It's a 2-lane roadway. And they were looking to make it a complete street design with the raised grant to help make it more bike and pedestrian friendly, much safer for them, slow down speeds in the corridor, things along those lines. So in terms of this, we had very limited data in terms of bicycle and pedestrian volumes. We had one count from one day and one location in the middle of a corridor. So that was difficult to estimate, well, how many bicyclists and pedestrians do you see in a year? How does that translate to when a project is complete? So we used the StreetLight data as part of this. The Capitol Trail is not too far from this location where we do have good counts. So we used the StreetLight indices for that location with the calibrated counts we had up there, and then applied it to the Pocahontas Trail corridor. And it looked like it worked pretty good in terms of giving us a good estimate of daily and yearly pedestrians and bicyclists throughout the corridor that we were able to use for the benefit cost analysis in this corridor.